Hello and welcome back to my YouTube channel. Today we will be making the Tilted Tunic. In this tutorial, I will not be showing you how to work the stitches in rows, so some knowledge of pattern reading is required. However, I will be walking you through the pattern and explaining each section. This will give you a good visual of how the sweater comes together and make following the written pattern that much easier. And if you'd like to see more tutorials by me, feel free to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe. To complete this project, you will need a copy of the pattern. You can buy the pattern on PDF like it is here. That's available in my Ravelry and Etsy stores. And you can also view this pattern for free on my blog. I'll have links for all of those in the show notes. You will also need some worsted weight yarn. Now I would go with a lighter worsted like this Caron Simply Soft. The tunic that I made in the adult, pictured in the adult pattern, was Sugar Bush Rapture. And the one that I made for my daughter, I made that out of Loops and Threads Cottony Silk, which is actually classified as a number 3 DK. So anything between a DK and a number 4 worsted would work quite well. You will also need a 5.5mm hook and a good pair of scissors and a measuring tape. The first thing I want you to do is take a look at the pattern, and I want you to scroll down to section 1, first triangle, and you'll see that here is where you're going to decide on your sleeve circumference. Now, this pattern offers quite a few options for sleeve circumference, and it does not matter what body size you are making. You can choose whichever sleeve circumference suits you the best. The best way I find to measure for sleeve is to take your tape measure and wrap it around the largest part of your arm, which is usually the bicep. And whatever measurement you get there, whether it's 11 inches, 10 inches, 12 inches, 24 inches, then you want to, if you want a close-fitting sleeve, then you can choose the measurement that's closest to your measurement. If you want a loose-fitting sleeve, then you can go 1 or 2 inches larger. So once you have chosen your sleeve circumference, I want you to follow this section of the pattern according to what sleeve size you've chosen. So if you take a look down here and scroll down, you'll see that for a 10-inch sleeve, you're only going to do the first 9 rows of the pattern. For an 11.5-inch sleeve, you're only going to do the first 10 rows. And for a 15-inch sleeve, you're only going to do the first 13 rows. After that, if you'd like a larger sleeve, you're going to have to repeat rows 4 through 13 until you get the specified number of rows shown here. So this is my finished section 1 triangle. As you can see, I have worked 10 rows, which would give me a sleeve circumference of an 11.5 inches. I've turned this one so that it is right side up. The way that I tell right side and wrong side with this pattern is you can see that I worked into the back loop only of this row, and it gives you a nice little kind of a ridge detail here. So you want that ridge detail to be showing on the pattern, so that is the right side. And you'll notice that one side of this triangle is short, while the other side is long. You also want to make sure that as you work these sections, you stop and check for gauge. You'll see that in row 9, there is a gauge check. And to measure for gauge, you're going to measure the width across the tops of these stitches, and you're going to measure the height from the point. I actually measure from about there, from the point, up, straight up to the tops of the stitches. And once you have finished section 1 and you have bound off, you can continue on to section 2. Here is my section 2 triangle. Once again, I've turned it so that the right side is up. And if you take a look at these guys next to each other, you'll see that they are just a mirror image of each other. I'm going to zoom out a little bit here. There we are. So you'll see that they're a mirror image of each other. And you'll also notice that the working end of the yarn is in 2 different places. Each of them has theirs at their starting end over here. But one triangle will have the working end of the yarn up at this peak, and then one triangle will have the working end of the yarn over at this peak. You don't want to have it where both of them are in the middle or both of them are on the sides. If that has happened for you, that means that one of your triangles has the wrong amount of rows in it. And you'll want to take a look and see which one it is. You want one having the yarn in the middle and one having the yarn over at the side. And when you're working section 2, you want to make sure that you work the same amount of rows as you did with section 1, because again, it's very important. You want these two to be exactly a mirror image of each other. And once you are done section 1 and section 2, then you can move on to section 3. For section 3, we're going to be joining these triangles together. To do that, the first thing you want to do is lay them out as I have here. You want the short edge to be running vertically, and you want the long edge to be running horizontally, just like it is right now. So now if you switch these around, you'll see that this edge is much longer, right? That is incorrect. You don't want it sitting like that. You want it so that the short edges are together and the long edges are running along the bottom. The next thing you're going to do is take this yarn end in the middle. Now, depending on what size you have, your yarn end might be on this triangle in the middle, and that is totally okay. You just take whichever yarn end is in the middle, and you take your hook. And what I like to do is I just stick it through this very last, or sorry, this would have been the first stitch of that row. And then you grab your yarn and you pull it through. I like to leave a little loop there. Pull it so that they're tight together. Give my loop a little twist. And then I pull my yarn through it. And that just makes a nice little knot. And that is the only place you're going to join there. You don't need to sew this down. In fact, you don't want to do that, because eventually when this is done, this is actually going to be an armhole. So you just want to join at this very tip here. And it's just a little precaution to tack it together so that it doesn't move around when you're working your joining row. And I will show you next how that joining row works. So you're going to take out your pattern again, and you're going to scroll down to the section that says joining row. Now, there are 10 rows here, but you are actually only going to work one of these rows. The reason I have all 10 here is because the row that you work is going to be different depending on which row you left off on in sections 1 and 2. So for example, I worked 10 rows. I worked 10 rows of sections 1 and 2. So since I worked up to row 10, that means I'm going to work joining row number 11. If you only worked 9 rows in sections 1 and 2, then you will start off with joining row number 10. If you worked 13 rows of sections 1 and 2, that means you are going to start off with row number 4. Okay, so since I worked 10 rows, I'm going to work joining row 11. What you're going to want to do next is join your yarn to your work, and you will join it on the side of your work that contains this tail right here. Not the middle one, but the one to the side. That is your working side. This is where you're going to join your yarn. So this is what my project looks like after I've completed my joining row. You'll have a chain 1 peak up in the middle here. You'll have a large slit running down the middle. Your stitch count will have increased by 6 stitches working this row. So once you have completed your joining row, you're going to move on to your increase rows. Now, the increase rows work similarly to the way that the joining row worked. You're going to start off with the row after the row you just worked. You'll see that the row numbers here all correspond with the row numbers for your joining row. So I worked joining row 11, which means that I'm going to start down here at increase row 12. Then I will work increase row 13. And if I have not yet reached my width or my proper row amount, then I'm going to start back up at row 4. So if you worked joining row 4, then you will start with increase row 5. If you worked joining row 9, then you will start with increase row 10. And you're going to work your increase rows until you have a total set amount of rows, depending on your body size. We're not talking about arm size anymore. Now we're talking about body size. So what I want you to do is go ahead and turn your work and start working your increase rows. And work until you have the right amount of rows to correspond with your body size. Since I am just making this as an example, I only worked 4 of the increase rows. Yours will be probably much more, but I want to be able to keep this on camera, so I wanted to keep my project small. So once you have finished the proper amount of increase rows, in the paragraph below row 13, I have a listing of your total, what your total stitch counts should be. You should go ahead and count your stitches just to make sure that you have the right amount. And I also have a listing here of what your width should be. And the way to measure the width is to put these 2 little corners together. Get out your measuring tape, and you'll want to measure across the bottom. So measure that and make sure that you have the proper measurement of what it says that it should be for your body size. So once you have the proper amount of rows and the proper width, you're going to carry on to section 4. And you're going to start off section 4 the same way that you started off your increase rows. Section 4's rows are numbered the same way that the increase rows are. So if you left off on increase row number 11, then you will start off on section 4, row number 12. If you left off on increase row number 6, then you will start off on section for row number 7, and so on and so on. And do pay attention here to rows 8 and rows 8 and 9. These rows are worked slightly differently according to your size. You're only going to want to work this part of row 8 if you're making sizes extra small, large, 2x, 3x, and 5x. You're going to want to only work this row or this section of row 8 if you're making sizes small, medium, XL, and 4x. And the same goes for row 9. And yes, and it also goes for row 13. So just pay extra special attention to that. Once you've worked up to row 13, you're going to repeat rows 4 through 13 until you've worked the same amount of rows that you worked in section 1. So for my section 1, I worked 10 rows. So that means I'm going to work 10 rows of section 4. So this is what my section 4 looks like completed. You'll notice that it's no longer a triangle shape. It's kind of in the shape of a house. We should still have this slit down the middle. And if you pull these sides over, you'll notice that they should be about the same height as this slit. They might not be exactly the same, and that's not the end of the world. What we're going to do next is join these two corners together so that we can then start working in the round and working the lower body. So we're going to join and start working in the round. Now this join is super simple. You just want to pick up your project and get situated so that your hook end is over on the right side or on the left in case you're lefty. Then you're going to want to find your first stitch. Don't forget that these are all decrease stitches. So you want to find the top of the first stitch, slip your hook on in there, yarn over, and do a slip stitch. And I like to pull mine a little bit tight just to make it nice and secure. But that's all you're doing. You're just joining your last stitch to your first stitch. And then we're going to turn. And that's when you're going to start working your in the rounds for section 5. So section 5, the rows, or sorry, these are rounds now. The rounds are numbered the same way that they were for the rows before. So I left off on a row 5 repeat. So that means that I'm going to start off with round 6. If you left off with a row 13 repeat, then you're going to start off with a round 5. Do also pay attention to rounds 8, 9, and 13. Just like the rows before, they are slightly different depending on what size you're working. So I'm going to go ahead and work a few of these rounds, and then I will get back to you and you'll get to see what mine looks like. Okay, so you can see that I've done a few rounds of section 5. I'm not going to do too many because I have to keep my project small to keep all of it on camera. But you're going to repeat rounds 4 through 13 of section 5 until you've achieved a length that is 2 inches shorter than what you'd like your final length to be. And you'll be measuring from the shoulders down. So if you take a look and if you flip your project over so that your working end is on the bottom, this is the bottom of your tunic. Up here is the top. These are your shoulders. Those are your armholes. So you'll be measuring from the shoulder down. And once you've achieved the proper length, now we're going to move on to section 6, which is the bottom trim. And I'm going to show you how to do that next. So I finished my section 5 with a round 10 repeat. This trim does look better if you finish with a round 6 or a round 10 repeat, but it's not absolutely required. So you're going to turn your work to face so that the right side is facing you. And again, the way we know that the right side is facing is you'll see the ridge from working into the back loop only. So once your project is facing the right way, you're going to chain 10. Then you're going to single crochet into the second chain from the hook and in each chain across. Okay, so now that you've got 9 single crochets there, you're going to slip stitch into the back loop only of your next unworked stitch on the body of your sweater. The back loop only thing is only optional. You can slip stitch into both loops if you like. I just find it looks better if you work it into the back loop only. So slip stitch into that next stitch, and then you're going to slip stitch again into the next unworked stitch. That is row 1 completed, and now you're going to turn. And you're going to skip these 2 slip stitches, and you're going to single crochet into the back loop only of the next stitch. And then you're going to single crochet in the back loop only of the next 7 stitches. So back loop, single crochet back loop only in 8 stitches total. You should have 1 stitch here left unworked. You're going to single crochet into both loops of that last stitch. Okay, and that is row 2 of your trim completed. We're going to turn and work row 3. Chain 1, and I want you to place a single crochet into both loops of the first stitch, and then you're going to single crochet in the back loop only of the next 8 stitches. Okay, and now you're going to slip stitch into the back loop only of the next unworked stitch on the body, and then slip stitch into the next stitch, the back loop only. Okay, so that was rows 2 and 3 of the bottom trim. You're going to keep on repeating those rows all the way across until you get to the chain 1 space. So keep repeating rows 2 and 3 until you've worked into all of these stitches up to the chain 1 space. I'm going to go ahead and do that, and I'm going to show you what it looks like and then what to do next to work this corner. So now I've worked my trim rows across to this chain 1 space, and I finished on a row 2 repeat. That is important. You want to finish on a row 2 repeat, and your last slip stitch may have fallen into the chain 1 space, or it may have fallen into the last stitch before the chain 1 space. Either of those is acceptable. What really matters is that you finished on a row 2 repeat, so your hook is out here at this corner. So we finished like this. We're going to turn, and we're going to chain 10. Okay, And we're going to be working these similar, well, pretty much the same as the trim rows that we worked before. So you're going to start off single crocheting in the second chain from the hook and each chain across. Okay, and then you're going to slip stitch into the back loop only of your next stitch. And then into the back loop only of your next stitch. And then you're going to turn and you're going to you're going to skip these 2 slip stitches and single crochet in the back loop only of the next 8 stitches. And then you're going to single crochet into both loops of your last stitch. Then you're going to turn and chain 1. You're going to single crochet into both loops of the first stitch and then single crochet into the back loop only of the next 8 stitches. Then you're going to slip stitch into the back loop only of the next stitch and then slip stitch into the back loop only of the next stitch. Okay, so you see you're working these rows just the same way that you worked these rows. The only difference is now we're working this way. And once you've finished working into all of these stitches, then you're going to start working into the stitches on the body of the sweater again. And then you're going to keep going all the way around until you get back to the beginning, repeating rounds or rows 2 and 3. Now, when you get back to this part here, you want to finish with a row 3 repeat. If there's 1 stitch left over, you can skip that. But if you get all the way back to the last stitch, that's great, as long as you finish on a row 3 repeat. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to show you what it looks like next. Okay, so as you can see, now I've worked my ribbing rows first into these stitches and then back into the sweater body. And I kept going all the way along here till I got back to where I began. So I worked my last row repeat, which was a repeat of row 2, and I'm into the last stitch. If there was one stitch left over, you could just skip it, just slip stitch into the next stitch. And what I'm going to do is slip stitch into this first stitch just to make it a little more secure. Then we're going to turn it so that the wrong side of the sweater is facing you. And you're going to slip stitch through the back loop only of the row you just finished and the bottom bar of your first row. So just like this. And that bottom bar might be a little bit tight, and that's okay. Actually, what I like to do is go through both loops of the last one, just to make it nice and secure at the edging there. Okay, then you can snip your yarn and bind it off. And And that bottom edging is done. Let's zoom out a little bit here so we can see it. There we are. Okay, so next we are going to go to section 7, and that is where we are going to sew up our shoulders and create our neckline. So sewing the shoulders is pretty straightforward, and you can do it whichever way you find easiest. This is just the easiest that I find. So I like to turn my sweater inside out, and I like to use these locking stitch markers. You can see I have some very cute ones here. If you don't have cute locking stitch markers, that's totally okay. Bobby pins actually work quite well for this as well. So I just take my stitch markers or my bobby pins, and I start off pinning the corners together. And this is where the point of your shoulder will be, right? So I'll pin those down. You pin the front piece to the back piece, right? And then I'll decide how wide I'd like my neckline to be. You can make your neckline as wide or as narrow as you like. Do keep in mind it needs to be big enough to fit your head through it. So what I recommend then is that after you've placed these 2 stitch markers, you place your inside stitch markers, the ones that'll go against your neck. So you place those ones, and then you try it on. Make sure that you can get your head through it. Make sure that the neckline falls the way that you would like it to be. If you don't have, if the sweater is not for you, and you don't have your recipient available to try it on, then you can just get out your trusty tape measure and measure it and make absolutely sure that it's at least their head is going to fit through. So the rest of this pattern is fairly simple, and if you got this far, you're going to have no problem at all with the rest of it. So you're going to turn your sweater right side out again, and then you're going to add a simple single crochet border to your neckline. I explain in the pattern how many single crochet stitches are to go into the end of each of these rows. And then you'll start on your sleeves. You'll join your yarn in the very bottom corner here where the underarm is, and you'll work your sleeves in the round. The stitch pattern for the sleeves is the same as the stitch pattern for the body of the sweater, making it very, very simple, as well as the cuffs are the same stitch pattern as the bottom trim. Then once you've worked both of your sleeves, all you have to do is weave in your ends and you're finished. I really hope you enjoyed this tutorial and that it made making your tilted tunic just a little bit easier on you. If you enjoyed this video, please feel free to give me a thumbs up and subscribe to my YouTube channel. And until next time, happy hooking!